Hello and welcome to On the Money. I'm Mark Hamrick with Bankrate.com. This is where we connect the dots with what's going on in the world and your money. Today we have a special guest. She's Faye McCray, editor-in-chief of Psych Central, a Healthline Media company. Before we bring her in, I want to highlight the results of a new Bankrate Survey. Money is cited by 42% of Americans as having a negative impact on their mental health, including anxiety, stress, worrisome thoughts, loss of sleep, or depression, at least occasionally. 28% said they experience this daily. 57% said a cause was insufficient emergency savings, the top issue. This was cited more often by women, 60% of members of Generation X, and 59% of millennials. So today we're all about mental health and personal finances. And now finally, I can welcome my colleague and friend, Faye McCray. Faye, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark.
Faye, from where you sit, being focused every day, every minute, in a sense, on health and mental health, what can we say more broadly about the state of our collective mental health these days?
You know, we're having a tough time, and I actually love that you framed it as our collective mental health, because navigating the pandemic, which indisputably impacted our mental health these past 2 years, was something that we faced as a collective. But let's talk stats for a minute. So 1 in 5 US adults experience mental illness. The number of adults with symptoms of anxiety and depressions has tripled since 2019. There were growing rates of alcohol and substance abuse since 2019. And new CDC data shows that 44% of teens in the United States report feeling persistently sad and hopeless. And that's up from 37% in 2019. So there's certainly a growing mental health crisis, and it has been exacerbated by the pandemic.
That's very important, Faye. So we sort of have this baseline of the challenges of our mental health more broadly. And then, of course, where I sit at Bankrate.com, we talk about the economy and how it affects personal finances. And it's not a secret to anyone out there these days that we've been through a pandemic over the past 2+ years. That has affected the economy, the responses to the pandemic between the spending on the part of the federal government, the moves by the Federal Reserve, and now the withdrawal of those tailwinds. We've been confronted with the steepest inflation in 40 years, and this is really weighing on consumer sentiment and households and their ability to mitigate these high prices. You know, Faye, there's it's kind of a corny line that money doesn't bring happiness, but it can make misery a little more tolerable. There's a piece of that I don't like, because it seems like it's sort of making money concerns essentially a joke, which they are not. But is it true from where you sit that if we have sort of these problems over here to begin with, and then we have an issue with our personal finances, it's almost like piling on at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the survey results were really loud and clear in this regard. Like, when you're experiencing the stress of being afraid you won't be able to pay the bills or afford basic needs, it can be all consuming. Worrying about your budget, especially if you're facing financial challenges, can increase anxiety. It leads to poor decision making, and it creates hopelessness that can sometimes even lead to depression. So financial stress has an undeniable impact on your mental health.
Faye, we obviously deal with broad brushstrokes with some of this data, but as you pointed out at the outset, there are some specific impacts on different groups, or as we like to say in the survey world, cohorts. So what can we say about, let's say, some of the differences that we see in this survey, and based on your own experience as well, whether it's white versus persons of color, women, men, gender differences, and then the age differences that we have out there with different generations at different points in their own personal financial journeys?
Yeah, I mean, one thing interesting about this study is it showed that women, millennials, and people earning less than 50K a year were most likely to cite money as having a negative impact on their mental health. And notably, these are also populations that tend to have the biggest barriers to mental health care, whether that be affordability or finding culturally competent therapists to address their unique needs. I'd say first, affordability should never be a barrier to care. Checking in with your insurance company, asking for sliding scale or reduced fees, or enlisting the help of a psychologist in training are choices that can help fit therapy into your budget. I'd also say exploring community care from local organizations and groups could be a non-traditional route to seeking care and support. Mental health care is healthcare, and it should be accessible for all those that benefit. And what we're seeing is that in certain segments of the population, it's more pressing than ever.
And so to sort of come at this a different way, Faye, in something that we saw in the survey, not only did we have people identifying how money was essentially making them feel stressed or nervous, but they talked about the frequency of that, whether it's daily or weekly, and I would think for some it's almost omnipresent. As we sort of try to go about this identification of the struggles with mental health that we all have to deal with, what advice would you give people to sort of take their own temperature to know whether these problems are something that do warrant care of some kind, if not an intervention with help of a professional?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, our relationship with money is so complex, and I would say if the worry is excessive, if it's something that is interfering with your daily activities, if you're unable to function because of the stress and the worry and the emotions associated with it, seeking support is very important at that juncture.
And one of the great things about the work that we get to do, Faye, is at Bankrate, we have free and trusted information to help people with their financial journey, really across the spectrum of personal finances. And you've got tremendous information and tools at Psych Central and Healthline Media. What can we do to consume information to help ourselves in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, one of the positive things that has come out of kind of the transparency around this subject is that there are an abundance of resources. In Psych Central, we dedicate so much time and space to making sure people have actionable tools and resources to navigate mental health crisis. So I would say, start with your computer, start with your phone. We have wonderful quizzes as gateways of assessment for determining how you feel. How are you feeling? How much are these things interfering with your life? That's a wonderful first step, and going to trusted sites to get those resources. And then, of course, taking that extra step to finding support.
One of the things I found fascinating about the survey, Faye, and thank you for sharing that, because that's a tremendous bridge for people to address the issues that we all experience. We asked people specifically about, in the range of events or experiences that they have involving personal finances or money, what can trigger emotional negative emotions. And number one was unexpected expenses, which we mentioned at the top of our interview. But even a third said making a purchase or having to talk about money causing a problem. And, I think that's just so remarkable, Faye, because, as consumers, as individuals, it's inevitable that we have to do those things at some point. And so if we can't even talk about money, if some people find that triggering negative feelings or just making a purchase, what does that say about our facility as individuals or a society to go about behaviors that we need to be able to engage in a constructive way?
Yeah, again, I mean, there's just so much complexity wrapped up in our relationship with money. We had this fantastic article on Psych Central recently about money stress. And one of our experts was quoted as saying, don't attach your net worth to your self-worth. And so often we do, whether that's a product of our upbringing or our spending habits, we bring a ton of baggage to these conversations. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would sit down to pay the bills, and it was like watching her go to war. She had a checkbook and piles of paper, and it was clear to me that A, it was something she didn't want to do, B, it was something she had to do, and C, the outcome had a direct correlation to whether or not I got to go to Toys R Us. So, I mean, even then I learned it was stressful and it was connected to my happiness. And for better or worse, we carry those things with us. And that's why so much of the work to find support begins with redefining our relationship with money.
What do you think about the challenges that we do have as a society and in our own households and our workplaces to try to have successful conversations about financial issues, whether it's our own personal finances? It could be a husband and wife saying, how are we going to pay the bills? It could be a coworker talking about or wondering whether they're being paid adequately, to have that conversation with a supervisor or colleague. And then there are the generational differences that was highlighted in a recent article by Sarah Foster at Bankrate, where members of families, let's say parents and their children, perhaps adult children, can't always have good conversations about how much money they're making. Isn't it remarkable that when we live in this golden age of information and 200 plus years into our democracy, that we're still struggling with these things?
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing I've learned from working on Psych Central content is like you gotta dive in and you have to get uncomfortable and we have to have these conversations and they are uncomfortable. I read an article recently about millennials being more transparent about their salaries and sharing conversation about that to be able to highlight those disparities, that we've for so long have been buried and uncovered. So it's so important that we get comfortable talking about these things.
So Faye, as we really try to help people both with their personal finances, but also coping with the challenges of their everyday lives, what actionable advice or coping strategies can we share with our viewers to help them get through to the other side, or at least get through to the end of the week?
Yeah, I would say first seek support. It's so common to push off your support needs when money is the source of your worry. You feel shame and you may think once you've earned enough or saved enough, for example, you'll feel better when, in reality, tough financial times often occur for reasons totally outside of our control. So you don't have to wait to find support. Mental health professionals and other sources can help you release the shame and give you the clarity you need to find your way through a tough situation. We also love to focus on things we can control on Psych Central, and we recommend taking walks outside, listening to your favorite songs, getting some exercise. I would say most importantly, though, practicing self-compassion. You want to identify free and low-cost sources of finding joy to help you as you navigate these difficult times.
I love that, Faye. Those are all great suggestions. I'm a longtime walker, and I found that during my times of greatest stress, a little bit of exercise or a long walk can really go a long way. So I can really dial in on those suggestions. I'm also thinking about the fact, Faye, that for some people, and I would say I've been guilty of this myself at points in my life, that sometimes I'll hear a nagging voice in my mind that there's a problem that I need to attack or at least address or acknowledge. And maybe the strategy ends up being denial. And certainly, mental health, financial challenges, I'll just say, in the financial world alone, if you have the bill collectors knocking at your door, proverbially speaking, whether it's they're calling on a telephone or trying to be in touch, ignoring the ability or the need to pay rent or mortgage payment ends up being the absolute worst thing to do. And there's a correlation or a similarity too, isn't there, with mental health, where if you're hearing your own intuition urging you to take action or saying this is a problem that needs to be addressed, that really is a message that we should try to heed, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would say the two don't have to exist in separate spaces. I had a great conversation once with a mindfulness expert, and I said, I'm just struggling, to kind of clear my mind. And he said, you can't clear your mind. The only way you do that is you have to be dead. Like, you're always going to be thinking, you're always going to be wondering about that next thing, and that's okay. But it's that relationship with those intrusive thoughts that I think is important. So you want to be taking action. It steps in the positive right direction when it comes to your financial stress, but they don't have to exist completely separately from your mental health. You want to be addressing that at the same time.
Well, that's why we're here, right, Faye? And that's why our variety of Red Ventures websites are available for people to dial in, read more, and we'd invite people to do that and to keep this conversation going. Faye, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned some things, and I think we all perhaps have some more work to do in this space. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mark.
And for more, check out Psych Central, a Healthline Media company, as well as Bankrate.com. Until next time, from On the Money, I'm Mark Hamrick. Take good care.